In the Studio is sponsored this week by Citibank and by Chiclets.
Excuse me, is this thing on?
Whoa.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
You're welcome.
Guitar up.
1,
Turn
2,
that guitar
3.
up.
Hi, and welcome to In the Studio. I'm Redbeard, bringing you the stories behind the greatest rock and roll albums in history. Today we'll go in the studio with an album that fused the melodies of pop music with the power of hard rock.
Doesn't matter how you get there as long as you get there in the end. We've got this song, let's do whatever we have to get the thing perfect, or as near as our version of perfect, which we did to a certain extent with Pyromania.
Hi, this is Phil Cullen and Joe Elliott of Def Leppard, and you're in the studio for Pyromania.
As the 1980s began, there was something of a hard rock revival going on in Great Britain. A whole generation of young bands who had never really latched onto the punk movement or the new wave of dance music that followed. Instead, they had continued to listen to the music of such pioneering heavy metal bands as Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, AC/DC. Those were the influences that would lead to the creation of so many English hard rock bands in the late 70s, bands like Iron Maiden and Whitesnake. But the biggest stars to emerge from the British hard rock resurgence were 5 teenagers from the northern industrial town of Sheffield, England, who called themselves Def Leppard. What set Def Leppard apart was their ability to translate their heavy metal roots into hook-laden pop songs. It was music with enough crunch to satisfy hardcore rock fans, and at the same time, enough melody to appeal to a larger audience, particularly young female fans. It was a marriage of musical forms that made Pyromania, released in early 1983, one of the biggest-selling hard rock albums of all time, and it laid the groundwork for the commercial breakthroughs of American bands such as Van Halen and Bon Jovi. I asked Def Leppard's lead singer Joe Elliott about the music that influenced him when he was a boy, growing up in the north of England.
Where I actually grew up, all the neighbourhood kids were about 15 years old when I was like 9 or 10.
So you hung out with
So when I
people
was
that were
like
older.
9, I was listening to Aqualung by Jethro Tull, Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson.
At 9?
Yeah, Thick as a Brick, all that kind of stuff, as well as Rod Stewart. You know, like Every Picture Tells a Story, what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
But then when I started to try and develop my own kind of pop taste as well, I mean, I did like those, but I had no option but to, because that's what they were all listening to. The first thing that really blew me away completely was T-Rex with his song called Get It On.
No kidding.
I saw them on Top of the Pops, and I thought, I saw Mark Bolan, and he had all this long curly hair, women's shoes on, believe it or not, and like all these scarves and velvet trousers. I mean, look, probably looking back now, I looked a right idiot, but I just looked at him and thought, wow, what a guy. I want to be him. And then it was about a year after that I got into Mott the Hoople big time.
Oh, Mott, yes.
And ever since,
absolutely.
Ian Hunter's been my all-time hero.
Joe Elliott's love affair with rock and roll started early and never waned. Here's Joe and Def Leppard guitarist Phil Cullen. What did you study in school? How to get out?
Choice of words is study.
What were you supposed to be studying?
Next question.
Yeah. What does study mean? No. Well, it's everything that anybody studies, you know, English, mathematics.
Just the usual
geography,
stuff.
You know, woodwork. All the things in life that come in really useful when you're singing a rock and roll band.
Yeah, yeah, right.
All the normal, just general stuff, but I was just one of them kids that used to get the school reports that said, does have the intelligence but lacks the effort, you know. I just couldn't be bothered. I always knew I'd be okay. I took my exams, I didn't swap for them, I passed them. My mind really was elsewhere. I was either going to be a rock and roller or a footballer.
A soccer player.
Yeah.
Rock and roll or a
Soccer player,
football player. So that was really a big
I actually
part.
told my careers teacher that.
Did you really?
Yeah.
They laughed at me when I said I was going to be a guitarist. They said, oh, well, I don't think you're going to be able to do that. Perhaps you work in a guitar factory or something.
Oh, guitar factory.
Yeah. I said, no, you don't understand. I want to play it. And they said,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean,
go.
you know, you've got to take into consideration they have to think like that because 99.9% of the kids at school don't end up doing what we're doing.
Oh,
Which is
absolutely.
fact, you know.
Absolutely.
But there's always the one little sticking point like me and Phil that's going to turn around and say, well, you're wrong, pal. You know, we were lucky to get kind of break out and get away with it, you know. We had the courage of our convictions at least.
That's Photograph from Pyromania and Def Leppard, which was founded in 1977 by guitarist Pete Willis and bass player Rick Savage. They soon added another Sheffield schoolmate, guitarist Steve Clark, and eventually 15-year-old drummer, that's right, 15-year-old drummer Rick Allen. Joe Elliott didn't join the band until a year later in 1978. Phil Collen, who grew up in London, was not part of the original Def Leppard lineup, but as he and Joe Elliott explained, Collen had much in common with the lads from Sheffield.
They throw you out. It's literally like, that's it. Right, boys, out into the big bad world.
That's it, yeah. There's the factory, go find the door, they'll pay you on
That's true,
Friday.
yeah.
Goodbye.
Exactly what.
And that's the kind of life that, I mean, especially for Phil as well, because although London is like a very beautiful and big kind of city,
Right,
it's got
big.
it's big. It's got a lot
It's
of.
fantastic.
It does have a lot of industry on the outskirts, and Sheffield is a very industrial type city. We were just destined to do factory work. You know, I was working in a
me too,
steel factory.
Well, I was in a burglar alarm factory in London when I left
A
school.
burglar alarm
And
factory.
you know the funny thing? He had to wire them up, and he's colourblind.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. So for both of you, rock and roll, was that like a way out?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
See, I knew that I wanted to do that before, and same with Joe, you know. So it was, for me, it was just like passing time and to pay my Les Paul off that I borrowed off of my mum.
The factory job.
Yeah. So, you know, it was like a temporary thing.
And I was working at this place called Osborne Mushet
And what is Osborne
Tools
Mushet?
Limited, and they were manufacturers of carbide tips, drills, you name it. And I was working there.
This is like heavy industry.
Yeah, I was responsible, as a 17-year-old kid, I was responsible for ordering everything in the firm, from grinding wheels to soap, nuts and bolts, clean cloths, Swarfiger, you name it. Of course, I used to bodge it all the time, you know. I wrote half the lyrics of the first album in the basement of that factory.
Of the factory?
Yeah, in my dinner hour. And then, to this day, they don't know.
Whoa, that's Def Leppard and Action Not Words from Pyromania. Joe Elliott picks up the story of working in the tool factory in London.
They kicked me out for playing cricket down in the basement.
For playing cricket in the basement of the factory?
With a Bakelite knob, which is like a very heavy, like a top of a gear stick. It went through a window. And they weren't too impressed.
And so that was the end of your career at
well, they didn't
Osborne?
fire me. They just came down and said, there's opportunities for you to kind of leave. I think you should take them. So I did. And they handed me 500 quid, which paid off my part of the PA that we had.
How much is that in
And I got a
in
job,
$800?
$800 maybe.
Yeah.
They give you about $800.
And that was the Friday, and then the following Tuesday I got a job as a van driver, which
A
also
van
came in
driver.
very, very handy because I could take the van home at night.
Yeah, I progressed to a van driver for the next job I had after the burglar alarm factory. And I was driving motorcycles around London delivering things.
But the vans came in handy
Yeah, that
because
was
when
great.
you're in a band, you see, you can throw all your gear in the back of them and go and do a gig, and you don't have to rent a van. So it's like I was getting jobs that were based around the band, you know.
Yeah.
But we all had the jobs to pay off. The good thing about it was that we were working as not like 8:30 till 4 in the day or 7:30 till 5 or whatever hours we had, earning money, and then we would go home and have something to eat, and then 6:30, 7 o'clock till maybe midnight, we'd be down at this old spoon factory rehearsing, and we had an income of maybe $250 a week between us, which would pay for
Total?
yeah, total.
All of the members of the band,
Yeah.
you got about $250 a week?
Yeah, I was on 16, 17 pounds a week when I started at Osborne's, which is about $30 a week. It did go up. It did get higher the older you got, but it wasn't much more. Maybe $300 a week, which you would pay for your board and your cigarettes and your booze, and pay off your 10 quid a week for a guitar or a PA or whatever we bought. We'd be down there till midnight, and then we'd have no money, so we'd be walking home in midwinter 7 or 8 miles and then getting up at 7:30 to go to work. I mean, it's every band that's ever made it has done that. It's no big deal. That's part of the thing that you have to go. That's your apprenticeship. That makes you appreciate what's happening now, is remembering what it was like.
True, yeah,
you always have this affection for it because you know that you'll never go back to that.
Somewhere in the distance.
That's Too Late for Love. When we come back, we'll hear how Phil Collen became a part of Def Leppard. I'm Redbeard, and you're in the studio for the 10th anniversary of Pyromania.
Welcome back to In the Studio for Pyromania. I'm Joe Elliott of Def Leppard.
And I'm Redbeard. By 1979, Def Leppard had managed to finance and produce their own EP, and a major label deal soon followed. Their first full album, On Through the Night, was released in March 1980. It was around that time that Joe Elliott met Phil Collen, who was guitarist in a band called Girl. When original Def Leppard guitarist Pete Willis left abruptly, Joe Elliott thought of Phil Collen immediately.
And I rang him up one night, and it was about 4 in the morning, and this groggy voice on the other end, and I said, can you learn 16 songs in 3 days? And he said, yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
And then I rang him back the next day, and he said, well, probably not. I said, oh, well, let's leave it for now, see what happens. But middle of 82, it happened. So I only had to wait about a year. Which on our standards is like nothing.
Collen replaced Willis halfway through the Pyromania recording sessions, which were produced by Mutt Lange, who'd also produced Def Leppard's previous record, High and Dry. Lange, who'd worked in the past with AC/DC and Foreigner, had a reputation as a stern taskmaster, much different from Tom Allom, who'd produced Def Leppard's first album. Joe Elliott tells us more about Mutt Lange's approach.
He knew that we were then restless and very impatient, and he knew that there was a certain energy that he wanted to capture of this young, energetic, fast, hard-rocking band. But at the same time, he wanted to take us one stage further than Tom had done. So there's like this compromise going off that neither of us knew about. It's like he'd be kind of trying to lean us in one direction, but trying to not lose the energy by not making us keep doing it over and over again to get perfection. So it's like he'd compromise himself a little bit, standard-wise, and we were compromising ourselves energy-wise, and we ended up with this very energetic, but pretty much better than the first album,
High and Dry.
High and Dry
record. Definitely was a step forward.
And then by the time we'd finished touring and got back together and wrote the songs for Pyromania, with Mutt there in the room this time while we were piecing the album together, which is why he got writing credits on the last 2 albums, is when we were doing pre-production for High and Dry, we had the songs and we just turned up with them. And we did them, and little changes that got made didn't warrant any major credits or anything. And everybody's quite happy with that. But with Pyromania, it was basically 6 people sat around in a circle, facing each other, bouncing ideas off. So it was like, we'd sat down and said, listen, On Through the Night had done so many copies and been reasonably successful. High and Dry was a much better album and was slightly better. This is the 3rd album, which is, in a lot of bands' cases is the major album, and it's kind of make or break album. So we decided we'd really go to town and try and make the ultimate rock album. So we put a lot more effort and energy into not the recording of the record, but into the actual songs. So once we knew the songs were great,
and the arranging and
the arrangements were perfect, and the lyrics and the hooks were there, then it was a case of just putting it together, which is why we then, at that stage of our careers, could understand a little bit more Mutt's way of thinking of like, doesn't matter how you get there as long as you get there in the end. We've got this song, let's do whatever we have to get the thing perfect, or as near as our version of perfect, which we did to a certain extent with Pyromania.
Def Leppard, coming under fire from Pyromania. It took nearly 9 months to complete the recording of Pyromania, which was done in London's Battery Studios. Some of that was due to the personnel changes, some to Mutt Lange's perfectionism, but much of the time was simply the slow process of writing songs. Here's Joe Elliott of Def Leppard.
Sometimes it amazes me the way that when we write songs, like Phil, for example, I'm watching play. Whenever Phil picks up a guitar, he never plays chords. He just blitzes and practices his lead a lot. Yet when it comes to writing songs, he writes with such simplicity it just doesn't make any sense. And it's like you get off on a certain excitement that you're not expecting. I've always had melodies in my head, and I've never known what to do with them because I've never had an outlet through my fingers until I can play a few chords, which helps. And I about 4 years ago started trying to pick up on piano, and it's you get out some kind of thing that somebody else can improve on, but as long as you get the melody over the top. And I've always listened to a lot of things that have been very melodic, like Queen and Bad Co, and even the pop stuff in England, like when Slade were around, they were heavy, and so was Sweet, and so were T-Rex and Mott the Hoople, Gary Glitter, all the glam rock bands. But they had melodies.
But they were
over heavy-ish type guitars.
Technically, they were pop songs.
They were pop songs with a heavy edge, and if you can get 5 people that have got a certain thing of wanting to be in a band, and you've got maybe Phil's influence of the heaviest side, I'd say Deep Purple and Montrose, which, I mean, we all like as well, as much as, you know, he can listen to a Sweet song as much as I can. I probably favour Sweet more than Purple, and he'd favour Purple more than Sweet or whatever. But the two will mix, and they don't repel. And you put all that together, and you are capable of compromise. Well, not compromising. It's more like it's just the best idea always wins. It's a complete democracy. And we never fight like, well, I didn't get my last chorus in on the last song, so I want it in on this one, and if you don't let me, I'm going to stamp my little feet, you know. It's a case of like the best idea wins, and we all know that. I've regularly will hear Phil or Steve turn around and say, well, your chorus is better than mine, so we'll use yours. And then, you know, it's not a case of like, I want to get mine in. It's like, we just take whichever's the best idea. So everybody puts in these hundreds of little bits, we piece them all together, and that's why everybody ends up songwriting on the songwriting credits. Everybody ends up happy because we've got a great song, everybody's involved, and it's got all the ingredients that you need for a good song.
Joe Elliott thinks the combination of different musical influences is a key factor in Def Leppard's success. Here, for instance, Joe talks about some of Phil Collins' contributions.
And he's one of the few people I know, actually, sounds like I'm brown-nosing, doesn't it? One of the few people I know that actually listens to what's happening now. There's a lot of snobbery in musicianship where you'll get certain people won't listen to up-and-coming bands because they automatically think, oh, we're better than them, so I won't bother listening to them. So instead of always constantly looking up to the guy you learnt off, like, say, Richie Blackmore's and your Jeff Beck's of the world or your Eric Clapton's, and continuously staying behind, he's doing the same thing to the younger guys as well. And that is another major contributing factor into keeping the band always fresh, because what you can end up doing is you develop a style which eventually is your own. I mean, anybody's first album is a
derivative
conglomeration of everything you've listened to for 20 years.
It's impossible not
Then
to
you
be.
develop your own style, and the mistake that a lot of bands make, i.e. say Uriah Heep in the 70s, is they stick to this style all the way through and it never changes.
They clone themselves, and then it starts sounding like that, and then it starts sounding dated. So, I mean, if you stay one step ahead of that, the worst crime a band could do is sound dated.
Yeah.
You know, and it only sounds like that if you're not fresh and enthusiastic. So yeah, you can play kind of old-fashioned type music, you know, whatever you want to call it. But if you've got conviction and everything, it still sounds cool. We're not a rock band who contrives a pop song or a pop band that contrives a rock sound. It's just anything that sounds good to us. It's that. So you know, I think there's a difference there with some bands. They're a rock band and they get this pop song. It's not really them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it'll stand out as the one track out of 10 that's not them.
Right.
Or whatever. With us, we've always tried to go for variety.
Yeah, but it's a natural thing. You know, a lot of the bands in England were just too far into the heavy metal type thing, and there wasn't a lot of songs going off. And that's the great thing about Def Leppard. You know, there's songs. You can actually sit there and sing them as well.
That's Def Leppard's Foolin'. When we come back, we'll hear how Joe Elliott deals with the pressures of multi-platinum success. I'm Redbeard, and you're in the studio for the 10th anniversary of Pyromania.
Welcome back to In the Studio for Pyromania. I'm Phil Collins of Def Leppard.
And I'm Redbeard. Thanks for joining us. No one in Def Leppard was more than 23 years old when Pyromania was released in early 1983. Drummer Rick Allen was only 19 at the time. It was an enormous accomplishment for such a young band and a lot of pressure. Here's Joe Elliott.
About halfway through the Pyromania album, I first noticed that it was getting difficult to create something that was as good as the top-notch artists. We weren't that little band from Sheffield anymore. We had to be better and bigger than Boston, Foreigner, Led Zeppelin, you name them. And all of a sudden you say, okay, then if I've got to be that, if I want to be that big, and it's going to be, that's the way I want my life to be, you know, you have to forsake a lot of things.
You know, your social life goes out the window totally. Girlfriends and just stuff like that are just regular standard things become really difficult to keep up.
You know?
So you have to kind of make a choice, really. You have to go in that direction if you want to achieve success, really.
Now, that doesn't sound too glamorous.
Well,
you know?
there is a slight myth. You know, I don't want to put it down.
No,
I mean, it does have its glamorous sides, but there's a lot of bull that goes along with it. You know, but as Phil says, you make that decision when you start off. If you want to be successful.
There were times during the recording of Pyromania when the members of Def Leppard weren't sure they could live up to Mutt Lange's expectations. Joe Elliott remembers one in particular.
I was really having a bad time trying to sing a song. I can't even remember which one it was now. I mean, that's how insignificant it's become.
Right.
But at the time, it was a major headache. And we didn't have a row, but I just said, listen, I can't do it. And he said, well, okay, you can take that defeatist attitude if you want, but if you want to be one of the big boys, you should just sit down, think about it, come back and try again. You want to be better and bigger than Lou Gramm, you want to be better than Robert Plant, you want to be up there with the big boys, you got to work it. You got to say, yes, I can do it, no matter how long it takes you. Lo and behold, the next day I went in and did it twice as good as I thought I could.
I've noticed that with guitar things. It used to make me do things that I couldn't physically do, and it'd just sit you there and you'd get it, you know. Amazing guy.
He really is like the most easy-going slave driver.
What a great way to put it.
You could ever meet, you know. He very rarely loses his temper. He'll never lose his temper with it. The only time Mutt will ever lose his temper if we lose it first. Then he'll have a go back. But he'll never turn around and say, oh, this is stupid, you've been doing it for too long. He'll just keep going until you get it, you know. He'll suggest, let's just take a break, and we'll, you know, to the extent sometimes you just get in the car and drive to the other side of the country just to go and look at a tree. He's big time into gardening now. He's
gardening?
That's his thing, yeah.
Loves his gardening, you know. Him and George Harrison. And you know, and then you'll come back, and in 20 minutes, you'll nail what you've been trying to do for 3 hours before it, you know. Yeah. It's just that time away from it helps. And he knows exactly when to bring that in. We don't have any rules. There's no rules. It's just that we just go in there and it's like the blind leading the blind, but they really know where they're going because they've got this inbuilt radar.
It all paid tremendous dividends, with Pyromania selling more than 8 million copies around the world. There would be more obstacles to overcome, of course, including the New Year's Eve auto accident that cost drummer Rick Allen his left arm. And Steve Clark would later die in January 1991 after a lengthy battle with alcoholism would force his departure from Def Leppard. Rock and roll isn't always bright lights and good times.
We all have our moments where you just think, I can't cope with this, but, you know, you have to go into the sanctuary of your dressing room, your bus, your hotel room or whatever, just calm down a little bit. But there's, you know, like Phil says, girlfriends suffer, you don't get to see mom and dad very often, you can't go down the local boozer anymore, you know, you're forever pulling your T-shirt out of a bag instead of a drawer, you know, but these are the things that you make your mind up, you make that decision at the beginning of the career. If you're not prepared to put up with that, then don't have any aspirations of being a big act. But if you want to do what we're doing and what Zeppelin did and what Aerosmith are now doing, you have to forsake a lot of things. But at the same time, you're doing it for one reason, and one reason only, is because what you're doing you love. And you end up being married to the band, and you know, the band is your wife to a certain extent.
Not the such band, a bad thing, really.
Not the band members.
Right, yeah.
You know, and it's great. It's like a Boy Scouts outing when we get going. You know, when you don't think about the pressure of things, when everything's going well, it's just like 5 kids out on, like, some kind of adventure playground, you know.
We got on as people, which is so important. You know, it's one of the reasons why we're still together now, is that there's this kind of gelling thing, and then we do everything together. You know, it's kind of like we're like brothers, if you like. You know, I'm an only child, so's Joe, and it's kind of the nearest thing you get to, like, it's like being at school almost with all your pals at school. Like a school outing. That's what going on tours like with this band.
Or a football team, maybe.
Yeah.
A bunch of bank robbers.
Rock of Ages from Def Leppard's Pyromania. We'll be right back in the studio after this.